On today's episode, we discuss a sick Arizona man and his heinous crimes against two girls. And we eat his last meal, but not without a struggle. All on the very first episode of The Last Supper.
Welcome to the Last Supper podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Jess.
And we're here to tell you a story today and a little bit about our podcast. We're going to talk about a very depraved and sick individual. So this podcast is kind of about true crime and also about food. So we'll just tell you the story about this sick person that was on death row, and then we'll also be eating their last meal that they had. So without further ado, let's reveal the food here. And Jess has not seen any of this while I was cooking it or anything. So she has no clue what's under here. It could be something like worms or something nasty. Did it smell good at least?
It smells good, so can't wait.
Alright, here we go.
Ooh. Oh, I'm seeing some things that look pretty good.
We're going to talk today about Richard Stokley, who, like us, is an Arizona resident. And he lived in the same county that we do right now, Cochise County.
Really?
Yeah. His last meal consisted of okra. He had a cream soda. He had one peach, one apple, one banana. He had French fries, biscuits, a wedge of cheese, a porterhouse steak. And doing my research, it seems like a lot of people with their last meals, they go for the steak.
You gotta go for the steak.
It said he had a salad. We kind of have an unconventional salad here. It's more just like mixed vegetables. But we're gonna put his choice of dressing on it. Blue cheese.
Oh, okay.
This is chunky blue cheese.
Oh, okay. I'm not crazy about blue cheese, but we'll try it.
Then we have our ice cream here, which has a little story. Someone ate all our ice cream, and we had to go get more ice cream.
Oh, that's weird.
So, yeah, that's all the food, and we're going to try to eat all this food by the end of this story.
All this food?
All this food. Every single bit of it.
What?
Maybe
Okay.
not all the ice cream, or, well, maybe someone will. She'll probably work on the ice cream.
I can handle all the ice cream.
And then...
You get the rest of it?
Yeah.
When you hear the words, The Last Supper, what do you think of? Many people might think of the story of Jesus sharing the Passover feast with his disciples before he was executed. During the meal, he told his followers, "As I have loved you, so you must love one another."
I'm already full. That soda's pretty good, though.
Yeah. That's good. Oh no. It is chunky.
It's not bad.
It's not good either.
So, let's talk about what happened. It's a pretty crazy story, so hopefully we can hold our food down.
In July of 1991, the naked bodies of two 13-year-old girls were recovered from an old abandoned mine shaft in a ghost town outside of Tombstone, Arizona. They had been raped, and their bodies had been stabbed and brutally stomped upon. Their killers were two local men, but only one of them would end up paying the maximum penalty for his horrifying crimes.
What do we do with the cheese?
We eat it. We have to eat that whole wedge of cheese.
That's not possible. What?
Cheese, 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 cheese. Everyone wants to see you finish the cheese. They believe in you.
I don't know why, but that's like the hardest thing. That's the hardest thing for me.
You gotta take a big bite.
Oh, that's just weird.
Eat it.
Put some blue cheese on it.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Extra chunky blue cheese. What's crazier, the chunky blue cheese or the chunk of cheese?
Probably the chunk of cheese. I don't know why someone would just want a chunk of cheese.
On the evening of July 7th, 1991, Patty Hancock was working her shift as a cook at a bar and restaurant in the small southeastern Arizona town of Elfrida, when a dark-eyed and dark-haired girl walked in. It was Patty's 13-year-old daughter, Mandy. She asked her mother if she could spend the night with her good friend Mary, who is also 13. As Mandy spoke with her mother, a large, bearded man sat at the bar. At 6'4", 230 pounds, the local townsfolk called him Bigfoot because of his hulking appearance and hairy face, and his cold and surly attitude. His real name was Richard Stokley, a 38-year-old bouncer and ranch hand. Glenn Brazil and his business partner, who owned the restaurant and bar, would often pay Stokley to mow the grass and cut the weeds, and then Stokley would sit and drink at the bar. Later in the evening, a young man, skinny, baby-faced, and about 20 years of age, entered the restaurant. It was Randy Brazil, son of the owner. He had only been in town for around 6 weeks. Randy had gotten in enough adolescent trouble while living with his mother in Arkansas that she decided to send him to Arizona with the hope that his father, Glenn, could straighten him out. And Glenn put him to work in his restaurant. Randy and Patty talked about what time he would be at work the next morning, and Patty gave the young man a money bag filled with the evening's cash and receipts to take to his father, which he then put in the trunk of his dad's Ford LTD. We need food to survive, and so food naturally becomes a symbol of nourishment and life-giving sustenance. In the Last Supper of Jesus, the food became a symbol of Jesus' life and death, as he gave his physical life for the sake of others. What Mandy had failed to tell her mother earlier was that she and her friend planned to camp out at a local 4th of July weekend fair being held behind the town's gas station. As it happened, Richard Bigfoot Stokley and Randy Babyface Brazil were at the event as well. Stokley had come to participate as a stuntman in an Old West reenactment for a fundraising skit. Stokley and Brazil were seen together sharing a bottle of whiskey, despite the unlikely companion's nearly 20-year difference in age. Brazil had also been seen visiting the tent where Mandy and Mary were camping. Mandy already knew Randy Brazil because he had gone to parties with her older sister previously. The girls were also seen standing next to Randy Brazil's car, speaking to Brazil, who was in the driver's seat, while Stokley was in the passenger seat. Then, at around 1 a.m. on July 8, 1991, the girls told a friend they were going to the restroom. They would never be seen alive again.
And this is nothing. Because in a few episodes, it's gonna get worse. Maybe I shouldn't have got sharp cheddar. Would you like the fries?
Good.
They're beer battered pale ale with pale ale.
Apparently, Richard Stokley needed to take a bath, and he asked Randy Brazil to drive him there. Brazil took the two girls along when he drove Stokley out into the desert near Tombstone, so that Stokley could bathe in a livestock watering tank. According to later records, Stokley claimed that when he came back from his bath, Brazil was raping one of the girls. Rather than trying to stop the young man, he joined in. Then Randy suggested they kill the girls because they would tell on them, saying, according to Stokley, they're gonna rat, and they're gonna get you too. So Stokley strangled Mandy, while Brazil strangled Mary. To ensure that the victims were dead, their bodies were stomped upon with great force, and Stokley also stabbed each of them in the right eye with his knife. As Stokley later admitted, quote, "I choked 'em. There was one foot moving though. I knew they was brain dead, but I was getting scared. They just wouldn't quit. It was terrible." Stokley and Brazil then dragged the naked bodies within yards of the stock tank, where there was a gaping hole in the ground, barely covered by railroad ties, which was a deep, water-filled, vertical mine shaft, and they threw them in. Although court records indicate the cause of death being strangulation, one article suggests Mandy could have still been alive when she hit the water 60 feet below, judging from the water found in her lungs during her autopsy. Then both men fled. Food can create connections with others, whether sharing a meal with family or friends, strangers, or perhaps even animals. We are acknowledging a common thread in physical survival, the need for food, and we're providing a type of kindness by giving that physical necessity. Randy Brazil dropped Richard Stokley in Tucson and then drove to Chandler, where he surrendered to police the day after the murders at his father's suggestion. Meanwhile, Stokley hitchhiked to Benson, where he called a woman in Elfrida, asking her to send someone to pick him up. When the woman asked about the missing girls, Stokley replied, quote, "What girls? I don't know anything about any girls," unquote. Police then arrested Stokley that same day at a Benson truck stop. When police questioned Stokley at the Benson police station, he at first denied any knowledge of the girls. But after hearing about Brazil's arrest and being asked about a particular mine shaft around Gleason, he admitted that he and Brazil had sexually assaulted the girls, choked them, and also admitted using his knife on both girls. Both men led authorities to the mine shaft where the bodies were hidden. After explaining how they had moved timbers covering the shaft to dump the bodies, Stokley pointed out where he and Brazil had burned the girls' clothes. The police were able to recover the nude bodies from the muddy mine shaft. Stokley seemed well aware of the trouble he was in and expressed hope that his trial would not take long so he could, quote, get the needle and get it over with, unquote.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how full are you?
5.
5?
A 5? What? I'm like a 7.
That means she's only half full, and she can eat twice as much as she eats. She can eat
Another chunk of cheese.
I could eat ice cream. I think I should.
Put a couple scoops in there. Oh.
As authorities inspected the evidence, gruesome details emerged about the crime. The hood of the car surrendered to police by Randy Brazil had semen stains as well as dents matching the shape of human buttocks. Palm prints on the hood matched Brazil. The back seat had semen stains matching Stokley and also had blood stains. Police also found a bloody pair of men's pants in the car. At the time of Stokley's arrest, police found blood stains on Stokley's shoes, and his pants looked as if they had recently been cut off at the knee. Autopsies showed that both girls had been sexually assaulted, strangled, which appeared to be the cause of death, and stabbed in the right eye. The strangulation marks showed repeated efforts to kill, as the grip was relaxed and then tightened again. Both victims suffered internal and external injuries to their necks. Mandy also had stomp marks on her body that matched the soles of Stokley's shoes, and Mary's body had a mark on the neck consistent with Brazil's boot. DNA analysis eventually indicated that both men had intercourse with Mandy. However, Mary's body cavities were filled with mud, making DNA analysis impossible. So, how did the last meal tradition begin? Some scholars say it started in ancient Greece, where it was believed that you had to feed the person who was going to be executed so they wouldn't come back to haunt you as a hungry ghost. In Rome, gladiators were given a final feast before fighting in the Colosseum. And the Puritans in Massachusetts would also hold feasts for the condemned, believing it emulated the Last Supper of Christ, and it represented an atonement for both the prisoner and the community. In the past, in the U.S., prisoners have been offered alcohol or a cigarette just before an execution, partly as a compassionate gesture, but also to calm the inmates' nerves and make them more cooperative. The last meal became more popular in the United States in the 1800s. It was seen as a humane act for the person facing execution. In the US, a prisoner might wait for over 20 years between sentencing and execution. So their last freedom of choice can be a significant thing. A prisoner's last meal is usually their last chance to control anything that happens in their final hours. The trial of Richard Stokley started March 12, 1992, and the verdict was reached on March 27, 1992. The jury found Stokley guilty of 2 counts of kidnapping, 1 count of sexual conduct with a minor under the age of 15, and 2 counts of premeditated first-degree murder. To make a defendant eligible for the death penalty, the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt at least 1 statutory aggravating circumstance. In this case, the trial court found 3 statutory aggravating circumstances. The first being a victim under the age of 15, secondly, multiple homicides, and thirdly, his actions being especially heinous, cruel, or depraved.
There's mitigating and aggravated circumstances. Mitigating is like maybe if you kidnap someone, some mitigating factors, maybe he was like nice to them, he gave them food or something like that, you know, like he took care of them. But like aggravating would be like, obviously he strangled these people and then he stomped on their faces and stabbed them in the eye.
Yeah, that seems pretty aggravating.
In his last-ditch appeals, Stokley argued that the courts did not consider evidence to mitigate his sentence. He attempted to argue that heavy consumption of alcohol seriously undermined, quote, his ability to appreciate the stupidity and illegality of his conduct, unquote, and also that he had sustained prior head injuries that impaired his decision-making. A clinical psychologist opined that Stokley's capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct was significantly impaired at the time of the incident. There was evidence that he and Brazil consumed alcohol on the day of the murders. Various witnesses testified that they had seen Richard and Randy drinking or appearing intoxicated. However, there was also much evidence showing that Richard Stokley was not significantly impaired by alcohol at the time of the murders, and did not suffer a blackout at the time of the crimes. He had disposed of the bodies and burned the clothing of the victims in an attempt to cover up the crimes, thus showing that he knew his conduct was wrong. He was also able to accurately guide the officers back to the crime scene, and had substantial recall of the events. The court rejected all the mitigating circumstances Stokley claimed to have, including a law-abiding past, cooperation with police, alcohol use, prior head injuries, and arguing that Brazil was more culpable, yet received a lesser sentence. After the U.S. Supreme Court turned down Stokley's appeals, he was sentenced to death on July 14, 1992. At the time of his sentencing, Stokley said he did not deny culpability, but he said there was no premeditation on his part. He also claimed he had been made a scapegoat. He said, quote, "What I am guilty of is being an irresponsible person for most of my life, running from responsibility, living in a fantasy world, and it was my irresponsibility on the night that this incident occurred that involved me in the incident. There's no words that can express the grief and the sorrow and the torment I have experienced over this. But I'm just going to leave everything in the hands of God because that's where it is anyway." Unquote.
So we're slowly but surely getting done with this food. Jess ate all the ice cream. And she's gonna help me eat the blue cheese salad.
I think I'm full now.
Did you hit the 10?
But all you did was eat ice cream.
Have you guys thrown in the towel yet?
Not yet. We're still going. Oh, tomorrow's gonna be our day off of eating anything.
Oh no.
About 20 years later, on December 5th, 2012, Richard Stokley was led to the lethal injection table at the state prison in Florence, Arizona. He was 60 years old. It took the execution team 52 minutes to find veins that could be used to administer the pentobarbital, a drug used to both sedate an inmate and stop his heart. The execution team finally had to cut into the femoral vein in his leg. Meanwhile, Stokley was chatty with the medical personnel. He warned them he had hepatitis, told a phlebotomist joke, and assured them he was doing fine. "I grew up a long time ago," Stokley said. "I do wish I could die doing something meaningful, you know. This seems like such a waste."
It seemed like he didn't have any remorse for what he did.
No, he didn't seem very remorseful.
He was just upset that he didn't,
Get away with it.
yeah, he couldn't live his life the way he wanted to or something.
Yeah, that's what I gleaned from those words. Like, oh, it's such a waste. My life was such a waste because now you're killing me. But it's like, well, don't murder people. Maybe that's a good idea if you want to do something with your life.
However, when Stokley was asked if he had any final words, he simply responded, "Nah." The pentobarbital rendered Stokley unconscious 5 minutes after the first dose was administered. The second dose was then given. At 11:03 a.m., Stokley's body convulsed one time. He was pronounced dead 9 minutes later. Stokley was the 34th person to die by lethal injection in Arizona since the state reintroduced the death penalty in 1992, which was the same year he was sentenced. His death was witnessed by more than a dozen family members and lawyers involved in the case. But Stokley never looked at the crowd watching from the other side of the glass.
Sometimes, you know, people that are being killed or whatever, they ask them, hey, you gonna have some last words? They'll say, yes, I'm sorry for what I did. I regret doing this. They'll talk to the family. Usually the family of the victims are there, present, watching this guy die so they can have a little bit of closure maybe, you know. It's not, obviously, it's not changing anything. It's probably, now they know this guy is no longer a threat. We're gonna have to recover from this. I think she's done with this podcast.
Welcome to the first and last episode of Last Supper.
So now let's talk a little more about Richard Stokley and his somewhat rocky past. Stokley reportedly had a chaotic and unstable childhood. He never knew his father and had been raised by various family members. By the time he was an adult, he had suffered numerous head injuries that stemmed from a history of bar fights and domestic violence. Once, he hit his head on pavement after trying to jump on the hood of his wife's car in the middle of a fight. and a second wife hit him over the head with an iron skillet. He also had his skull fractured once by a beer mug, requiring surgery, and another time by a tire iron. In fact, it's no surprise that he had a visible dent in his head. Despite all this, he had an above-average IQ of about 128. While he was a patient at a Texas hospital in 1971, Stokley was diagnosed with passive-aggressive personality. By 1978, he had been readmitted to the same hospital for psychotic depression. He reported feeling suicidal, along with a fear that he might harm someone else. The final diagnosis of the second hospitalization was that he suffered from a personality disorder with differential to include passive-aggressive personality, antisocial personality, and borderline personality. Stokley also claimed to have attempted suicide twice. In addition to these troubles with mental health, various relatives and acquaintances testified that Stokley was an alcoholic, and that he also considered himself to be one. He claimed to have consumed at least a pint of whiskey every day, and to have used various illicit drugs in the past. In 1977, he was arrested twice for public drunkenness, but the cases were dismissed. Stokley was then convicted of driving while intoxicated in 1986 and 1989, and also arrested in 1991 for driving under the influence of alcohol, but the case was again dismissed. Stokley's alcoholism wasn't the only cause for run-ins with the law. Although he had no prior felony conviction, he did have a history of other misdemeanor arrests and offenses, including a conviction for disorderly conduct in 1973, and arrests for assaults on 2 former wives, one in 1978 and the other in 1986. During Stokley's trial, the state called his 2 former wives. Both testified that he had physically abused them, threatened them with death, and threatened that their bodies would be thrown down a mine shaft. Thinking back to the fateful night in 1991, the heinous crimes that occurred, and the subsequent trial and execution of the murderer, you might be left wondering, what happened to the other guy? What did happen to Randy Brazil, the young man who took part in the sexual assault of 2 girls, the murder of one, and assisted in the disposal of their bodies? Well, after Brazil was arrested, he invoked his right to a speedy trial, and prosecutors said they offered him a plea agreement, because the constitutional time limit for a speedy trial would have run out before DNA results could be finalized. You see, forensic DNA testing was only just emerging in 1991, and at the time it required months to process. Months that the state did not have before Brazil's murder trial was set to begin. Even then, the state's attorney worried that, quote, the status of the law is in some question as to whether the DNA evidence would be admissible, unquote. Brazil quickly took the plea deal before the DNA analysis came back that could have proven his role in the rapes and murders. He claimed that Stokley had done the killing, and Brazil also refused to testify at Stokley's trial. Brazil pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 2 concurrent terms of 20 years in prison.
So he was, I guess, smart that he did it that way. But still, like, unfortunately, now he's out on the streets. So while he was serving the 20 years, he was serving 20 years at the same time for the other murder.
That doesn't make sense.
So he killed 2 people at the same time. So I guess, like, They said,
It's
yeah,
a 2
it's
for 1.
a 2-for-1 deal or something.
What? That's
2-for-1
crazy.
prison deal.
It seems like he got a really good deal out of that.
Yeah.
He was released in July 2011 and moved to Arkansas, where he married. When reached by phone for comment regarding the execution of Stokley, he simply said, quote, "Good riddance to him," unquote, referring to Stokley. Also, because of his plea deal, he avoided sex offender status and was able to live an otherwise inconspicuous life until about 3 years after his release, when he was arrested in Arkansas for urinating on a city hall building. According to eyewitness testimony, Brazil was observed arriving at the city hall complex driving a black Chrysler. He then parked his vehicle and attempted to open one of the doors of the building. When he found it to be locked, witnesses say he then untied his jogging pants and began to urinate on the door. The incident report stated that this continued for approximately 3 minutes, with Brazil attempting to cover the entire door with urine. Witnesses said that he then left the area in his vehicle at an extremely high rate of speed. Randy had been seen earlier in the day and had been drinking heavily, reportedly 2 pints. It was also reported that Brazil's wife works at City Hall, and the two had been arguing all day. Brazil was charged with careless and prohibited driving, disorderly conduct, and indecent exposure. He was given a fine and a short jail sentence. It might seem unjust that Randy Brazil, a man who, as the evidence seemed to point to, was at least as culpable in the crimes of July 1991 as was Richard Stokley, who went free after just 20 years prison time and is still living his life as a free man, apparently drinking heavily and urinating on buildings. However, that may no longer be the case. Upon doing research on Brazil, I came across a memorial page from a funeral home that read, Randy Ellis Brazil of West Memphis, Arkansas, July 30th, 1971 to October 29th, 2021. Randy Ellis Brazil, 50, passed away at his home in West Memphis, Arkansas on October 29th, 2021. He will be missed by many family members as well as friends. I find it significant that Richard Stokley had so many incidents of severe head trauma. Although the court didn't find it a significant excuse to pardon his actions, it is possible that it was a contributing factor in his behavior and perhaps even his personality. According to the Cleveland Clinic, moderate or severe traumatic brain injury can cause behavior and mood changes, and it increases the risk of anxiety, depression, and other mental and psychological disorders. There are organizations that are committed to the study and treatment of brain injuries, such as the Brain Injury Association of America, the Brain Trauma Foundation, and the United States Brain Injury Alliance. Please consider donating to one of these organizations or a similar organization. It could possibly help save lives.
That's the end of our episode. Thank you for watching, and don't make this your last supper. Are you trying to not throw up? Is this your last supper?
Yeah.